Continuing on, speaking of card companies, today we're going to touch on Topps. Topps is such a big company that operated from 1938 to the present that we're doing this in three parts. So part one is talking about the classic American sports company, Topps Baseball Cards. Began in 1938, and in the beginning, Brooklyn entrepreneur Morris Shorin's four sons developed the Topps Baseball Company, Abraham, Ira, Joseph, and Phillips. They revived the family's struggling tobacco business into Topps Chewing Gum Incorporated. And they borrowed a Topps moniker from the Chattanooga Candy Company they bought penny piece gum from, called Change Makers. Eventually, that bubble gum evolved into what was known as Bazooka Gum, originally the Atomic Bubble Gum, and later on Bazooka Joe in 1953. Topps, noted for being often in competition with Fleer, they created Bazooka, and Fleer had what was called the Double Bubble. Now, Double Bubble was kind of different because it was a non-sticky gum, whereas Bazooka was preferred in terms of its taste or lasting taste. And the reason, perhaps, that the taste was different or lasted longer is that Bazooka gum had a greater quantity of sugar contained within. The first Topps card were developed in 1949, and they were referred to as the magic photo cards. These were images that magically appeared when the blank cards are moistened and exposed to light. The featured superstars were not just baseball players, but also football players and boxers. In 1951, teaming up with the National Pastime, the Topps company created blue backs and red backs playing cards. There are 52 of the cards that were in two separate packs, one with the blue, one with the red, and you play the game using these cards. Many of the prominent and well-known players were on them, and this is, again, they had blue backs and red backs. And each card had the batting results of the particular player in the game, and that they also were packed with taffy in those times in 1951. It was 1952 that the modern baseball card era began, with the set that is well known to most people who are interested in baseball cards, the 1952 set. The first annual set had 407 cards, and it was distributed in 6 series. Cy Berger was the designer, and he simulated autographs on the card, as well as at his kitchen table with rulers and scissors. He basically formed the cards and wrote up the bios and the stats that are present in the back. The red back cards were the most common, but there were also gray backs. So when you see the different cards available, sometimes they'll say gray back or red backs. And as you can see, the initial cards pack sold for 5 cents. The cards were promoted with colorful displays in lots of the stores at that time. The card set had many players, and many of the cards are quite expensive, and people are surprised that the Andy Pafko card is so expensive. Well, that was the #1 card, most likely to be not in great value because of the fact it was #1, and the rubber band that the youth used to hold the cards onto made it so that it's very rare to find one of these cards in mint condition. The Matthews card, also, he was a rookie. It's expensive, not only because of his fame as a Hall of Famer, but he was the last card. Also, basically, they are scarce in high grades. The 6 series, which also was hard to get, also contained the Mickey Mantle and the Jackie Robinson, which upped their price, even though they were up already due to the status of Mantle and Jackie Robinson. Again, the gray and white backs are different in the cards, and also when you purchase them, some are worth more or less based on the availability of the numbers of sold. Some will note that on the back, around the number of the card, the baseballs, there is difference in stitching. Some odd cards that were in this initial inaugural set were Gus Zernial and his kind of Velcro baseball bat, and then the orange curtain that is behind Gil Hodges in this photograph. Many players are missing in this original set. Stan Musial, Nellie Fox, Ralph Connor, Casey Stengel, because of contractual issues at the time. First year offerings had many players that people want to collect and back. And certainly, even though it wasn't much as an issue as it is today in terms of rookies, the rookies were the Runnels and Bob Friend and Joe Nuxhall, as well as Dick Groat, Ed Matthews, and Billy Martin. And they also go for a more premium price. Because the cards today, and even back when the case baseball card interest was at its height in the 80s and 90s, were kind of cost prohibitive. So a reprint set actually was available in 1983, and it simulated the cards, and they were reprint cards, but it was kind of nice to have that set, though some of the players were missing because of lack of contracts. Archives cards became popular through Topps in the 90s. And in 1991, they did a reprint through the archives of the 1953 set. And then some of these cards were really not in the original set, but the Topps people kind of took a picture and put them on the same backing in that set. There was also a 1954 set that came out in 1994. Again, the cards that weren't available in the original set were made for this particular set. 2001 to 2005, the archive sets were reproductions of previous releases or retired stars on classic card designs. In 2003, the all-time favorites was available and use unused photographers. There's new pictures on the cards on these classic card designs, and they were put on backs that was not their particular year. And these then favorites also released in 2012. So the archives had a lot of cards that people couldn't afford the originals, and they could not only be able to acquire them in these reprint archive sets, but also to get players who weren't featured in certain cards in certain years and kind of add them as adjuncts to their sets. So a big interest in the card industry was to change the photography and be creative in the design of those cards. And so when the original cards came out, the 1954 cards had two pictures, a close-up and a black and white full-length pose. Then the shape was changed. In other words, instead of being longitudinal, it was horizontal, and the pictures were reused, and you had the active player this time in color versus in black and white. Similarly, in 1956, the picture was the same. The difference was that the player, in terms of his action, was against a tinted full background of game action. 1957, the cards were produced, and the player typically would have a headshot, or they would be having a piece of equipment, such as this one of Ted Williams with his bat. Prior to 1962, many of the photographs of the pictures of the players were not in focus and did not have sharp colors until 1962. But when the original 62 cards came out, there was a rather odd greenish tint due to the proportion of ink that was used. And so these cards were reprinted to make them more as you see those cards today. In 1960, you again included on the card another game action, as is seen in this card of Willie Mays. So photography and art certainly was a theme and importance, and the pictures on the cards. So in 1972, they actually used full photographs for the action cards. Post 1972, there were mixed pose shots in game photography, and sometimes there were individuals in the background or the players were out of focus due to the photography. This artist, who was basically responsible for the Diamond Kings and the Dime Rush Company, kind of also did art later for the Topps Company and did art cards that came under the title of Turkey Red and Allen Ginter series. What was kind of neat about the backs of the cards for the Topps was that from 1954 until as late as 1982, the cards in the back included these cartoons. 1954, the card collecting broke ice because it created hockey cards. Um, Now, one of the things that the quality of the cards early on in these years was due to that they were often used by children to like attach them to bike spokes with a clothespin. And in doing so, they made a flopping noise, but it certainly destroyed the quality of the card. And often the younger children would actually trade by flipping cards, and who flipped them and got heads or tails would win the card. And this kind of changed the shape and kind of ruined the quality of the card. 1960 was the first Topps All-Star rookie team. So again, now we begin to see the beginning of the interest in rookies, and they're actually promoting each card as it is the rookie card for these particular players. Also, it's kind of interesting to kind of keep in mind that there's a change in the teams because they expanded. So you have coming onto the scene 1961, the Angels, and in 1962, you have the Mets and the Astros, which were called the Colt 45s. So yes, for a long time, the cards had tried and used these cartoons, but it did experiment with pictures on the back in 1971, and again showed in later years on other cards in other years. A additional set came out in 1974, and this was the Topps Traded. And this was just a year after the AL designated hitter rule. So now you have kind of a change there in terms of the players and collecting players that are basically just hitters. These Topps Traded cards were really, again, valuing rookies because now you could, in the later sets, players that were called up later in the year and played a certain number of games were labeled as rookies, and this could be their first card. So now you would need to buy this particular set to get the real rookie card of that particular player. A rookie's called up from minor players. It changed teams during the season. So it's not just the rookies, but players that had basically been traded or traded teams. So traded players were frequently airbrushed. Why? Because sometimes they were, to get the cards out in time, they didn't know what team they were traded to. And so they wanted to appear on the card, not of their old uniform, but the new uniform, but they didn't know. So that several kind of things were done. They were basically either not given a cap or airbrushing, as you can see in these players like Tony Conigliaro and Ron Santo and the rookie stars of the Padres. They were often airbrushed over their minor league uniforms and anything to cover up which team they played for previously so that they could still be collected as being traded. A very interesting kind of player who actually was George Brett's brother was Ken Brett. Ken Brett, near the fame and recognition as George Brett did. But as you can see from looking at these various cards, he changed teams quite frequently. In fact, his cards went under airbrushing 6 times. So Topps had existed for a very long time in terms of the card market, certainly from the 1952 to 2022. But in January of 2022, Fanatics purchased Topps. So the formerly Walt Disney Company CEO Michael Eisner bought Topps in 2007, and he who sold the company to Fanatics for $500 million. Topps had held the Major League Baseball trading card rights for 70 years. In 2021, Fanatics quietly secured the trading card rights to Major League Baseball and Major League Baseball Association, and the CEO was Michael Rubin. Fanatics is a global sports retailer, merchandiser, and now sports car and memorabilia giant. So really, all of these cards that were kind of sprung up during the 80s and 90s had either been bought out or went out of business during that period of time. And now we're left with relatively 2 major companies, which will be Fanatics, who represents Topps, and Panini, who bought many of those smaller companies like Pinnacle and Score and Leaf and Donruss. So if you are interested in learning additional information about baseball card manufacturers or collecting cards for fun and profit, be sure to follow us below and feel free to hit the subscribe button and view our library of YouTube videos. Also, check out our eBay store where we have available for sale many of the cards shown in these videos. So I'm wishing you a good day and take the rest of the day off, and we'll talk later.